So good morning, everyone, and good morning, Your Holiness. I welcome you all back. It's a somber day today. As you know, there was a memorial service in honor of several persons in Tibet, monastics who have been injured or even have died in the honor of the Tibetan cause, shall we call it. And for me personally, it gives me a real sense, on the one hand, of loss and tragedy, but on the other hand, also a sense of inspiration and courage, which we also need, which we need in so many different realms, including this realm in this area of even environmental work. So I take that loss also as a kind of encouragement and an admiration of their courage and their incredible determination. And I hope that we can bring that same kind of determination to all of our work to benefit others, especially here in this context through the environment. And in many ways, that is, of course, also we can think of that as an ethical issue, as an issue of vision, as our speaker mentioned yesterday, as an issue of a notion of who we are and what our place in the world is, and how we can use the way we think about ourselves and our vision of the world in order to transform that world for the sake of others. So that, I think, is part of what our speaker will say today, Your Holiness. When we were thinking about, again, when we were in the process of planning this meeting over the last couple of years, we knew that we wanted to bring at least one voice from another religious tradition into this conversation. And I asked a few colleagues, I spoke to colleagues here and there, and one colleague said, well, if you could get Sally McFaig, I mean, she's what we call the mothership, the source of it all, so to speak, within Christian theology. And I have to say, I think that my colleague was right. I'm very pleased to introduce to you now formally Dr. Sally McFaig. She was, for many years, she taught at Vanderbilt University Divinity School in Nashville, Tennessee. She was the Carpenter Professor of Theology there and was extremely well known for her work. Of course, she was originally educated at Smith College, which I think you're familiar with, and at Yale University. And she taught at Yale University Divinity School and also Harvard Divinity School, as well as, of course, her many years at Vanderbilt. She's now a distinguished theologian in residence at Vancouver School of Theology in Canada, British Columbia. She has authored 8 books and many, many articles. One of her most important books is called Models of God. And in that book, she presents an alternative model, you could say, or even a challenging model to our notion of how we think about God. And one way that she reconceptualizes God is as, in a sense, the body of the world, or more precisely, that the world can be seen as God's body. Her latest book is A New Climate for Theology, God, the World, and Global Warming. And she's also working now on another book, which is about climate change and kenosis. Kenosis, Your Holiness, is a very interesting Christian theological term that I think Dr. McFaig may tell us more about, but basically it means the notion of sort of self-emptying, of selflessness, actually. It's a Christian version of selflessness. Yes, yes. So the emptying of the self. This book, Climate Change and Kenosis, is the one that she's working on now, and I think some of what she will say today will certainly connect with that book. By the way, Your Holiness, you might be interested to know that she actually met you many years ago, more than 20 years ago.
Where?
At Middlebury.
Oh, Middlebury.
Middlebury College, and she told me that she especially likes your story about mosquitoes, being, how your difficult relationship with mosquitoes. And she's used that story
I think not only myself, I think there are many people similar experience.
So without further ado, Your Holiness, let me turn it now over to Dr. Sally McFaig. Sally?
Your Holiness, it's a great honor and delight to be here with you all today. Thank you very much for inviting me. The other day, you said, and I agree, that the religions are part of the problem. They're supporting the status quo. They're not fighting greed and laziness and short-sightedness. Now, the question is, can the religions be part of the solution? And you also said the other day what we need. That is, we need putting knowledge into action. We need deep awareness. We need dedication, simplicity, and contentment. And we need to do all this on a daily basis. That is, practice mindfulness at all levels. And we need a different lifestyle. We need a different worldview. 20% of the population is now into the consumer lifestyle that's ruining our planet, as we have seen the last couple of days. But it isn't just that everybody else of the 80%, the 80% would like to live the way the 20% now live. And so the whole problem is going global. The consumer worldview is going global. Again, Your Holiness suggested...
자신이 휴득하셨어.
Again, Your Holiness pointed to the solution, a different vision, and you mentioned Bhutan and Estonia, and I would add also the lives of the saints, people who have deep awareness. People who have been able to release in themselves the joy and the confidence and the sense of responsibility that we need. So, the question becomes, how can religions help this deep awareness happen? Science has told us, we have started off the last few days with science telling us the worldview that we need. We need a worldview of radical interdependence and interrelationship. So now the question becomes, what should the religions do? And over the years, when people have asked me what I do, and I answer that I'm a theologian that investigates the connections between religion and economics and ecology, they give me a funny look. They say, what does religion have to do with financial and environmental matters? Isn't religion about such things as God and sin and salvation? But times have changed. In a very important report that comes out every year, The State of the World, in 2010, the report suggests that the religions must be major players in the most important issue of our day. That is the one we have been discussing, the economic, ecological crisis. The report applauds the religions for doing such things as turning out the light bulbs in their churches and finding scriptures that support environmental behavior. But the report bemoans the fact that the religions haven't paid the same attention to economics. Somehow they don't see the connection, which we have been talking about those last few days, between environmentalism and consumerism. That connection between environmental... Increasingly, however, we're becoming aware that these apparently different fields, economics and ecology, are tightly interlocked. Because of the huge use of energy creates both the consumer paradise as well as global warming. So consumerism is a major problem in well-off Western countries, but it's increasingly becoming a major problem everywhere. To put it as simply as possible, it's not sufficient to consume less. I mean, to consume in so-called green fashion. We talked about greenwash the other day and so forth. Rather, we have to consume less, a lot less. I bought a hybrid car recently. That doesn't mean that I can drive more. Some people think, well, if you buy a hybrid car, that means you're going to be able to drive more. Quantity still matters. In fact, we are at such a level of consumption in relation to the carrying capacity of our planet that reduction is a major responsibility. But no one wants to face this fact. No one wants to buy less, have less. We want more, 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 right? What if we have to give up the use of cars, period? What a thought. It makes us gasp. How could we live without automobiles, even eliminating them, reducing or not taking airplane trips? Surely not. But the shock that we feel when we imagine this causes us to realize how far we have to go in our attitudes and our practices. We human beings are so embedded in the culture of consumerism that being asked to consume less makes us almost gasp. And we stop for a moment, and then we have to inhale and take another breath and get back in our cars and our airplanes and continue on, right? But it's very important to take this very seriously. The culture of consumerism, the culture of consumerism is not just a form of life that we can accept or reject. It has now become like the air we breathe. And this is the nature of culture. What happened? Culture becomes nature. It becomes natural. It becomes the way things are. It becomes the world in which we live. Consumerism is a cultural pattern that leads people to find meaning and fulfillment through the consumption of goods and services. Thus, there's a well-known comment that consumerism is the newest, the latest, and the most successful religion. And the shopping malls are the cathedrals of this new religion. And every month we pay handsomely into this new religion when we pay our credit card bills, right? Yeah. We support this religion very well. So it means if consumerism is like a religion almost for people, then the task of changing culture from consumerism to sustainability is a huge problem. I think the religions are being handed a challenge here. And it's a very significant and difficult one. They're being asked to take on what no other field wants to take on, and that is a wholesale transformation of dominant cultural patterns, particularly at the level of consumerism. The World Report that I just mentioned says there are 3 causes of environmental impact: population, consumerism, and technology. And the secular institutions have had the least success in dealing with restraint, of restraining our consumer desires. But restraint at all levels, summed up by the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is a major practice of most religions. It's the one thing needed now, and I believe it's both a gift from the religions and a challenge to them, because as you said so clearly the other day, the religions have not been doing this. They've been going along with the status quo. They've been doing what everybody else is doing. So I think this challenge of restraint could be a sort of coming home for the religions, as well as their greatest contribution to this economic and ecological crisis that we face. So the report, the report sums it up well. It says, religion's special gift is urgently needed now. What is this gift? It's the age-old paradoxical insight that happiness is found in self-emptying, that satisfaction is found more in relationships than in things, and that simplicity can lead to a fuller life. I consider these words to be marching orders for the religions, and they're also the central theme of what I want to share with you this morning, sir. However, as the report points out, advocating this kind of position, restraint, could make the religions very unpopular. I mean, no one wants to hear that. People don't want to go to church if that's what the sermon is going to be about. Share with your neighbor. But such a position would not only serve the planet, but I think it would return the religions to their original roots, to their spiritual foundations. The message that the purpose of human life is to consume is a heresy. Heresy.
Heresy.
Heresy. Heresy. Yeah. and it should be condemned as such. The religious traditions may well find such a return, that is, a return to their basic insight of restraint, not for the sake of ascetic denial. It's not in order to flagellate oneself. Rather, it is because that the abundant life for all is only possible if some of us restrain our desires. So my small contribution this morning to our discussion is to condemn the heresy of consumerism by taking up the challenge of a look at what I'm calling kenosis, or self-emptying, which I'm sure I know is in Buddhism in certain forms, and it's also in Christianity. So my thesis, in a nutshell, is that we've reached the point in the public discussion of the planet's two crises, the monetary one and the ecological one, where we have one major need, one thing we need to do. Not more information, but practices. We need to move into action. And I want to look at this process of moving from belief to action. Now, we grant there's no one solution to this big problem that we have. Absolutely not. But can the religions make some contribution by sharing their profound countercultural and unpopular message that the abundant life at both personal and public levels is not found by satisfying one's ego in a market-oriented, individualistic culture. Rather, it is found by losing one's ego in service to others. Can we see that this much neglected aspect of many world religions, that is the countercultural self-emptying, is not the answer, but it is one important perspective that needs to be added to the sciences. The sciences tell us what worldview we need to share, and now we, in the religions, need to start putting it in action. Increasingly, the issue of how to live well has become one of changing how we're living now to living in a different way. And as the crises become worse, more and more people are questioning the reigning culture of insatiable greed. It's not making them happy. They're coming to the conclusion that the rewards... They're coming to the conclusion that the rewards of the consumer culture have been greatly overrated, and that serious change at a fundamental level, that is the most fundamental level of who we think we are in the scheme of things. Where do we fit in the big picture, us human beings? Then, once we decide who we are in the scheme of things, what should we be doing? Now, change at this level is very, very difficult. And in fact, most people find it impossible. Yet it is precisely... Having a new view of ourselves is very difficult. That is, thinking of ourselves different.
Yes.
Yes? Okay. In Christian circles... In Christian circles, this change is called conversion.
I think His Holiness. Did you?
Oh, sorry.
No.
I just tried to clarify. She says sometimes self, I,
His Holiness is wondering, when you say the fundamental change, conception of who we are as human beings, he was wondering whether you were touching upon the very notion of self and I.
Absolutely. Yes.
No need to change.
Yes.
We cannot change. That's a fact. I is there. But then, because of the you mentioned, now these days, you see people, this is some kind of belief if material progress is developed, then everything okay.
Will be
Our-
That kind of
Yeah.
way of thinking is mistake.
Yes. Yes. It's a mistake.
I always is telling people, we have this physical as well as mind. So material facility provide comfort only for physical, not mind.
Right.
So we need
Yes.
another way
Yes.
to bring inner peace or inner satisfaction. That's now some form of religion must be there.
some form of spiritual.
Religion or spirituality. So I usually call firstly theistic religion, like your religion. Tremendous sort of contribution made on this as a planet. And then second, non-theistic religion, such as Buddhism, Jainism. So no idea of creator,
Right.
but if we ourselves, you see, creator.
Yes.
But doesn't matter. You see, that also you see brings some kind of inner peace, inner strength. Then there must be third one. That is without talking religion, simply on the basis of our own inner experience or common sense and common experience, then the latest scientific finding, more peaceful mind,
Yes.
better health,
Yes.
peaceful mind,
Yes.
much happier sort of family. That's very clear. And happy, including happy marriage,
Yes.
with peace of mind. Oh, long-lasting happy marriage. I usually see, half joke, half teasing, especially those young lady. Say external beauty also important. You have to spend some money for cosmetic wear. But more important is inner beauty.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So the real sort of the factor, long-lasting happy marriage, depend on inner beauty, not external beauty. So these things,
Yes. We,
so warm-heartedness is a sense of concern of others' well-being and respect others' right.
yes.
These are the sort of
Key values.
I call without a religious faith, not talking about heaven or hell or Buddha or God or Jesus Christ or there's historical figure. Okay, doesn't matter. Leave it there. We,
Yes.
as a living being,
Yes.
nobody can deny our experience. The inner peace, satisfaction.
Right.
Everybody is loves kasadi, just do rest, or picnic or rest.
Rest. No.
Rest means not only just as a physical limit like that. Actual rest is mental level, completely peace, completely calm. That's a genuine rest, isn't it? Physically remain like this, but here too much worry, too much suspicion. How can call rest?
Rest.
So actually, in our life, I think during sort of everybody say you see sleep is very good. So sleep means physical action no longer there, but mainly is mind, some kind of full rest.
Rest. No.
Raya.
No.
I think even though on the bed, physical sleep, but mentally too much dream, nightmare dreams, or next morning, that person is unhappy. So even sleeping time, inner peace is very, very important.
Yes. Yes.
So now we have to sort of make clear, taking care, the physical comfort is not sufficient. It's just half. Another half, taking care about mental health.
Mental health.
That's, I think, very, very important. Here, not necessarily become religious-minded.
Religious person.
If you have religious faith, very good.
Yes.
Every religion, talking about our inner peace,
Right.
the message of love, compassion, it's the source of strength.
Yes.
Strength there, self-confidence there, then peace come,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yes. Absolutely. Yes.
Suspicion, anger, because of anger, this actually is based on distrust. So fear. So distrust, fear, they are no possible inner peace. So total faith to God. Immense sort of very powerful method to bring sort of inner strength. We created by God.
Thank you.
Even though we may passing through some difficulties,
Yes.
if you have full faith to God, all these are some way God's creation. There must be some good thing, some meaning, isn't it?
Yes.
Our ordinary sense seems to see tragedy, bad. But there must be some meaning, some reason, isn't it?
Yes.
If you have faith, full faith towards God. But we do not, we Buddhists do not do that.
Thank you so much. We are talking about the same thing. We're talking about who we are. What is the nature of the self? Are we beings
that is very complicated.
It's very complicated, yes.
I think last 4,000 years, you see.
That's right.
Discuss, investigate. Still not very clear. Each view
Right.
have, you see, own concept. So better to content on that level. I think even great scientists, I don't think you see, finally see clear sort of the pinpoint what is self. So more investigate, more because of vague.
becomes less and less clear.
Right. Yes. Well,
Then
what
one
the
she made-
sciences are telling us, the sciences were telling us, yeah, that we cannot be this selfish, greedy kind of person. That is, we human beings in the world cannot live that way because reality is set up differently.
Correct.
It's set up in terms of interdependence and interrelationship. So we need to change our understanding of who we are in order for us to act differently. Because we're caught now like a bubble. We're caught in this bubble of consumerism. And we don't think we're doing anything wrong, but the subconscious assumption of who we think we are is this insatiable individual. So there's a very important, thoughtful person who once said, "Be careful how you interpret the world. It is like that."
그래서
지금 개발지기 됐으므레스 수수 담불린 따초들이야 직 삽서제 만호제 마도 수수 따초 가리네 담불린 디나신 차대 얼다 스스로스 수수 자단 담불린 비제레 섬에나 수수응을 대차적으로.
So we live within inside our views, our interpretations of who we think we are, and we're profoundly, deeply, and often subconsciously influenced by them. So, for instance, if one holds a view of God and the world and ourselves, a view that is dualistic and individualistic, then we will decide that climate change is not a serious matter. Let God, who is the supernatural, all-powerful being up there somewhere in the sky, let God take care of the problem. We don't have to do it.
그래서 이거
근데 삼주 연구를 했어. 지금 제가
그럴 수 있어요.
이거 탑백에 지
내 가셔서.
땅지 진행 실로 요서 삼땅 보이나? 근데
그 달홍을
고유단 말다 달홍도 걸어봐.
달홍을 했어요.
그래서 고유단도 들고 때 삼대 제가 말 구조다다 소시야 그랬어지.
If, however,
그래서 we Tibetan 라라시디 라레레 세세 구조시는 뭐지 보세요.
We have a similar simple solution too. We can blame it on karma.
Yes,
It's
right.
karma. It's karma.
blame it on God. Let God do it. And
so similar.
yeah, right, similar, very similar. However, if we have a different view, if we see everything, including God, as interrelated and interdependent, and this is the worldview that's supported by science, and the wisdom of many religious traditions, dependent co-origination, for instance, then we're going to... Yeah. Then if we see it that way, that is, the self is interrelated and interdependent
Right.
with everything, then we're going to see that we are, in fact, responsible for the whole, including less fortunate human beings. So we need to change our images of God from seeing God as king and master over the world to imagining God as to imagining the world almost within God. like a baby in the womb. Instead of God as off there, up there, where the world is held within God's hands, or is like a baby in the womb. We live and move and have our being in God. God is not some far-off, distant being. So we need to wake up to the lie of the current worldview of individualistic, selfish fulfillment. This is a lie. The religions say it's a lie. Science says it's a lie. We need to wake up to a different worldview, one that shares our whole resources with our fellow creatures. And I think that the religions can help us here. That is, their understandings of limitation, of detachment, of self-emptying and compassion can help us do this. So the Christian notion of self-emptying and the Buddhist understanding of compassion, these are two illustrations, I think, of the contributions that religions can make. So we need to move from one worldview of ourself, of who we are in the scheme of things, a worldview that's very narrow and individualist and greedy, to an understanding of the self as what I'm calling universal, the self as universal, like dependent co-origination, the self in that way. So that the self includes everything that is. You yourself, Your Holiness, has said that we should view the self, we ought to think of, you yourself have said we ought to think of the needs of strangers in the same way that a mother responds to the needs of her child. And Christians say the same thing with their phrase, to love your neighbor as yourself. One could say in both of these cases that one sees the world as one's body. One's body doesn't just end with the skin of oneself. Rather, it includes everything in the world. The world is my body. And this includes everything, even the smallest insect, as the Dalai Lama pointed out the other day. We have to start from loving every single creature. So only a radical change in who we think we are is going to be able to make the deep changes that we need. That is, you spoke about putting awareness into action. But the awareness, in order to put awareness into action, it has to be deep awareness. It can't be superficial. And that is the difficulty. How do we get to deep awareness? The change has to happen at all levels of our life, from the personal to things like what we eat, how we get to work, to the public, things like tax car emissions and distribute scarce resources fairly. So I want to illustrate this with the life of a saint, a contemporary saint. Have you heard of Dorothy Day? She a contemporary contemporary Christian saint. She lived in New York City, in a New York City very, very poor neighborhood for 40 years, serving soup to homeless people.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and organizing strikes for workers' rights.
Strike. Very good.
Yeah. Her
Very
work,
active. That means very active. Not just only pray.
That's absolutely.
Oh, that's very good.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Absolutely. Her worldview came from trying to follow the Jesus of the Gospels, whose whole life, Jesus' whole life and message and his death on a cross was a way of total self-giving for others. He emptied himself of all selfish desires so as to bring his will into line with God's will. He emptied his own will so that God's will could take him over completely. Yes. Dorothy Day understood Jesus to be the visible face of the invisible God.
Very right.
That's very nice. Yes, it is very nice. Telling us both who God is. Jesus tells us who God is and who we are. God is love itself. God is total self-emptying. Total self-emptying. Whose power lay not in controlling the world, but in giving it life. And likewise, Jesus can be seen in the face of the neighbor. When we love the neighbor, we are loving Jesus. We are loving God.
My Muslim friend, one occasion, in a very remote village in Ladakh, very close Pakistan border, one Muslim
Imam.
head, Imam.
Imam.
You see, he mentioned genuine Muslim, Islam practitioner, should extend love
Yes,
entire creatures.
absolutely.
Same,
The same.
Buddhist way.
Yeah,
Yes.
of thinking.
Entire sort of.
Right.
We may not use the word of creature, but we must extend love and compassion towards entire
Beings, all beings.
sentient beings.
That's the heart of the matter. His Holiness has just struck on the most important point. That is, the understanding of the self that we need, of who we are in the scheme of things, is to include the whole world. So the world becomes one's body.
Correct.
As the Dalai Lama has himself said, God acts towards us the way that a mother acts towards an infant, with total self-giving love. So Dorothy Day, this saint that I'm talking about, was a middle-class, well-off American journalist. She chose voluntary poverty. Now, I'm not talking about destitution, somebody who has nothing to eat. She had money, but she chose voluntary poverty because
최근에 간다 즉 나를 의붓된 남 의붓된.
she chose it because she needed to move out of her bubble of middle-class consumerism. She needed to think differently. She needed to be upset and disoriented.
가사 좋대.
Yeah.
장부인 주인한 게 디어를 가사. 그드 세 걸고 세 땡지보다 인 가래고. 다음은 걸리야 차다절 맨도 더니.
나를
다 세디지 가사.
때문도 내 대신 루지세들.
가. 세선용 뭐. 아니. 땡지고. 제가 가서 우리 치행하다 촉시대하러. 그래서
So there are similar practices in the Buddhist tradition.
Yes.
One speaks of 12 cultivated qualities.
Yes.
All of these are aimed at adopting a deliberately simple life.
Of
Non-
what?
no-
Simple life.
Yes,
A
simple
life of
life.
simplicity.
Yes.
So with relation to
Not
food.
living.
Yes.
가서 in house
Right.
토요.
So
Right.
one of that
Lagomeva.
one of these includes that one seeks shelter in an environment without any roof.
Right.
One Tibetan monk who actually practiced that. So he denies already.
나를
Not living in room. Always, even monsoon, under tree.
Under tree. Right. Yeah. Well.
And then food.
나를
가사다.
Living
Then
on
the clothes.
나를
미션다 배주시니. 다 주스 집어들래. 유셔든데.
나를
야, 인 가다. 맨다. 다한테 돌아서 시다 유.
So clothes.
다 되면은 다 더서 아무 돈에 다 가서 그래. 그 대자르시.
So very simple clothes. Ideally, clothes that have been discarded by others.
Worn for 6 months.
정말 소소소리야 근줄이네.
His Holiness says some of them might even smell a bit.
We can wash. We can wash. 자, that did say 소소 타삼 할지.
And then
양 다도 이제 정말 찍어도 봐요.
and also eating only once a day, and that also, if possible, on alms, if their environment supports it.
So all these practice, such as altogether 12.
12 cultivated,
So all
qualities.
aimed for
Yes.
reduce
Exactly.
desire
Exactly.
and contentment, practice of contentment.
Absolutely right. And this is exactly what Dorothy Day lived.
Same.
She lived, she said, being poor is smelly and noisy and dirty. It's not fun. She didn't want to live that way, but she forced herself to live that way so she could identify with people who had nothing, so that she could stand in their shoes and feel what they were feeling. And a middle-class person often doesn't feel that. We have everything, so we don't feel that the poor are deprived. So she did this in order to change the way she thought about herself, from this consumer idea to the universal self. So she found no limit to her compassion, to how it stretched out. So I'm suggesting that the religions of the world have a major role to play in the climate crisis change. As the glaciers melt the third pole, the Himalayas, along with the other two poles, religions should answer the call to return to the deepest roots of the traditions, the roots of restraint, of limitation, of sharing, of self-emptying, and to do this not to flagellate the self, but in order to allow enough resources for other people and for other life forms. And this is especially addressed to first world people, like myself, who are well-off consumers, but also to all of those who aspire to be this way. And most of the world now wants that kind of lifestyle instead of what we're talking about. So it's this process of change that I think that I'm talking about, and that is so difficult. I mean, how do we change? We know that we should live differently, don't we? We have all the information, but we don't do it. How can we get ourselves to move? So I'm suggesting a fourfold practice that begins with the experience of voluntary poverty for people like me, to open up our eyes so that we can pay attention to something other than ourselves and our desires. Pay attention to the other, to the neighbor, near and far, and to do so at the most basic level. That is, not to just feel sympathy for them, but the level of sharing food. Unless we share the things that people need to live, then we haven't really walked the talk, right? So, beginning with poverty, the insights from Dorothy Day's story and other people like her, other saints, they're not spiritual and religious, as you have said. It's not about God and sin, but it's about sharing basic necessities. These people pay with their own bodies. And I couldn't help but think of the nuns and the monks who have immolated themselves. They are paying with their own bodies. Those are people who, like Dorothy Day, see the world as their body, and they pay with a total price of self-emptying. Most of us are not going to do that, but those special people create an ideal for us, a vision of how to give with total self-giving. So, this fourfold process of change that I'm talking about, you can look at your sheet now.
His Holiness is saying that the situation of self-immolation inside Tibet is a very, very complicated matter.
Yes.
These are the symptom of last 60 years experiences. Almost a million people killed, died. But things not changing, not moving. So they felt, of course, just the suicide more simpler because of the jump into river, or take some because of the
poison
lot of sort of sleeping pill, may die, right? But this self sort of the flame,
immolation.
See more attraction among the Chinese people.
More dramatic.
Among the world people.
More dramatic.
So they simply try to remind outside world, or the Chinese brothers, sisters also, we are passing through difficult period. So just you see demonstration, just suppress. Nothing happened. So then they felt, self
Immolation.
maybe it's more attraction rate. I don't know. Very difficult. Very difficult to say. Okay.
But it's true, sir. Saints are like that. They are the people that do the extraordinary things that none of the rest of us can do. But they make us see differently, don't they? They wake us up to our own lives of indulgence. So I'm talking about this fourfold process now of change, and you can look at your sheets that I gave you. I think it needs to start for middle-class consumer people. He doesn't have to read that. I'm going to talk about it. I'm sorry?
Yes.
No, well, it's going to be hard.
Okay.
Okay. Experiences of voluntary poverty. That is, those are people like in the middle class. They need a jolt. They need to wake up. They need something different in their lives. So to move away from the model of possessions towards self-emptying. And I call this wild space. If you turn your sheet over, you'll see this picture. And the big circle is the whole world. And the big circle is the consumer worldview. And each one of us, each person, the small circle is each person, that's each one of us, lives partly in the consumer world, in fact, mostly in that world, but there's also a piece at the side that hangs out, and that's the wild space. And that's the space where you... Wild space. Wild space is the space where you can begin to think differently. Something is different. And for middle class people who have a lot of money, the one thing that can cause them to think differently is not to have so much money.
So where would the millionaire fit in this?
Millionaires, billionaires.
Millionaires and billionaires. Because you're talking about middle class, so
Yes.
where would the millionaires and billionaires fit in there?
Billionaires
and millionaires. That's the super rich.
I feel
Yes.
we must increase middle class population.
Population,
We must reduce billionaire and millionaire.
Yeah.
So you are not talking about billionaire.
Oh, yes, I am.
So there are exception.
Oh.
There's a special kind. I mean, they have some kind of special kind from God. Become billionaire and don't care others.
Yeah. Well,
Do they have a wild space? The billionaires?
well, yes, I'm including them.
Oh, that's okay.
They
That's
get
very good.
included.
That's very good.
But it isn't just the super rich. It's also people like us, the 20% that have enough food and have air conditioning and so forth. So we need some wild space. We need to wake up. And even cutting out simple things in our lives, I mean, not driving our car or eating differently, helps us to experience a little bit of poverty, a little bit of deprivation, a little bit of what it's like to be poor. So once one experiences this change and wants to change and sees things differently, then you're open to a different model for living. Then you can begin to imagine an alternative. We can see that this model is a lie, and it's harmful to the planet, and we need to have a different model. So the second point in your sheet there, if you turn over back to the second point, the second point, in addition to voluntary poverty, is the focus on one's attention on the needs of others. To focus one's attention not on one's own desires, but on the needs of others, and especially other people's most basic needs, like food. So we're freed from this narcissistic obsession with ourselves. Then one is able to do the rare thing, and that is really pay attention to something else. Not as objects to use for your own goals, but as subjects in their own right.
자수가.
나를 간다 직도 셴래. 수수장장 삼다야 되 라월레. 데스 유전 현다 삼다야. 고치 현다 때든 삼다야 중으로 왔어. 근데 현다 삼다면 그 현다 되기 수수 표시 제기도 현다 삼다만 많이 봐. 현다 되기도 그런 미 그렇게 그냥 대화도 동하면 되면 되게 삼다야. 간다 지 오브젝트 파 공업변도 이제 맞아 봐. 간다 소자
Pay attention to something other than yourself, right? So these subjects are other human beings, but they're also other life forms, all sentient beings, and even the processes that support everything, the rivers, the trees, the climate. By realizing that every breath we take, every mouthful we eat, depends on others.
Yes, absolutely.
Then our model gradually changes from one of utilitarian, using everything else, to one of appreciation. We're grateful for all these other things. We begin to realize that a just, sustainable planetary living, both personal and public,
그래서 라바치 그래서지. 답변 닝버드 발라전 사바치네. 고사버게 개체면로.
one has to give up the old self in order to get the new self. The old self is the selfish, narcissistic self.
Yes.
You have to give that up
Yes.
in order to have the new self, which is able to live for others,
Yes.
in service for others.
Very good, very good, very good, very good.
So real abundant life doesn't come from getting more and more things. No. It comes from giving up those things when others need them and living differently. So this line, the third point that I make here, you see, what happens is we gradually, if we start doing this, we gradually develop this universal self, the self that includes everything, the dependent co-origination self. So the line that draws between one's concern for oneself and for others, it shifts. It gets wider and wider and wider and wider. First you care just about yourself. Then maybe you care about your family. Then you care about your relatives and your friends and your nation and even other human beings. But eventually you care even for the caterpillars. You care for the caterpillars. They can't be left out. So this journey, rather than diminishing the self, increases its delight. We become bigger, really.
Yes.
We include everything.
Yes.
Instead of becoming narrow and tiny and turned in upon ourselves, we turn out to the world. We fall in love with the world itself. Now, this may seem like an impossible ideal, this universal self. I mean, we see the lives of the saints, people like Dorothy Day, and we say, well, I can't be like Dorothy Day. But we can be better than we are. We can be different. We don't have to be the narcissistic, selfish, consumer self. We can go in a different direction. That's why Bhutan and Estonia, places where they've tried to do things differently, are good ideals.
그렇지 어다. 그 뉴신도 마찬가지로 못하기도.
His Holiness is saying that the question is still open whether in these communities they are not doing it because they don't have the capacity, or they didn't have the opportunity, following the consumerist model, or whether in the face of having an opportunity, then they consciously exercise a choice. So that still leaves, that question is still open.
We have to look, we have to wait another 10 years, 20 years, then we will see.
No, this is absolutely true. And it's not that any one of us or any community is going to achieve everything. There's no perfection.
Absolutely.
Everything is relative.
Absolutely.
But the Greeks said, if you know the good, you will do the good. But St. Paul said, I know the good, but I don't do the good. I know I should.
St. Paul.
St. Paul.
Now,
크라스인으로.
rimata, 지단스고래. 지단 그리고 지단 제베나 신베나 상부 신베나 상부 지그르슬라고. St. Paul 신베나. 네, 간다 상부.
St. Paul 숨으로.
숨으로. 그 시버점 그 제베 개봐요 말이야.
So, okay. Nonetheless, we live within the models that our culture creates for us and that we create for our culture. We live within these. It doesn't mean that we're going to live perfectly within them. But the ones that we assume to be true, the ones that we say yes to this new model, this universal model, rather than yes to the consumer model, then we're going to try and live differently. Okay, so finally, the last step is that this new model, it has to operate not just for the individual, not just at a personal level, but also at a public level. What we've been talking about, the environmental crisis, it means every individual has got to change, but also we have to have different laws. We have to have a whole different public system than what we have. So, for instance, I talk about planetary house rules. You know, if you all live together in a house, and you put up on the refrigerator some house rules, and the house rules are, take only your share, clean up after yourself, and keep the house in good repair for others. Those are 3 house rules. They work at the individual level, but they work also for the whole planet. Take only your share of the planet. Clean up after yourself, recycle, and keep the house sustainable, in good shape for others to come in the future. So, in conclusion then, other fields say, when they've made their contribution, they say, well, here is what I have to say, but finally it's a spiritual matter. It's an ethical matter. It's a matter of changing our behavior. And the religions then should say, yes, this is absolutely true. And our particular point is to help that process happen. It is a spiritual and ethical problem. So let us look at this process of change from belief to action. And what I'm suggesting, it has 4 steps of voluntary poverty, paying attention to the needs of others, developing gradually a deeper, broader view of the self, and then applying this at all levels, personal and public. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Now you clearly confirmed my belief. All major religious tradition.
Yeah.
The philosophical field,
Yes.
as Hasati yesterday, one lady used to mention that a lot of different views. That's the philosophical view, the field. But as far as practical, real message is concerned, message of love, compassion, forgiveness, tolerance, contentment, self-discipline,
Yes.
honest, justice, 100% same.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful.
The religions disagree about a lot of things. Some of them have ideas of God, some don't. They disagree about what is sinful and what is not. But they don't disagree at what we're talking about. That is, that the goal of human life is to live in a different way than the culture is living. And if all our societies are living in greedy, selfish ways, the religion should stand up and say, no, that's wrong. That's a lie. We should be living differently.
One time I met, I think now, more than 20 years, in Barcelona, the monastery called Montserrat or something.
Montserrat, yeah.
When I visited there, one Catholic monk came to see me. The organizer told me that monk last 5 years remained in hermit way of life, hermitage,
Right.
very little hot meal,
Yeah.
just water, bread. And when he came to see me, when we met, I asked him, I heard you spent 5 years in the mountain, hermit life, very little sort of proper meal. What kind of practice this period? He mentioned thinking, love.
Yeah.
when he mentioned that, in his eyes, some special significance. So that's the, because of the, I think, what's it, clear sort of
Indication.
because of the indication. If you implement what you believe sincerely, there's such a wonderful, because there is sort of same sort of potential to produce such a wonderful person. Wonderful. In any way, as far as education field, I think Christian brothers, sisters, I think made the greatest contribution regarding education. We Buddhists, not. Or Hindus also not. And Muslim also may not be. In ancient time, maybe, in Arab area, or civilization, ancient civilization, I don't know. So, I always admire our Christian brothers, sisters, they are sort of total dedication. Well-being of others. Many of them. Some are,
Some are more interested in the impressiveness of their costumes.
Oh, I know. That's true.
we Buddhists also, you see. Now, actually, after I came to India, I gave up all kinds of.
So there was a custom in Tibet for the High Lamas to wear this sleeveless jacket, waist jacket, with the silk brocades, you know. So His Holiness said after he arrived in India, he gave all of that up. So he said,
Except one. That is during my final examination, 1959, I wear one sort of.
Yeah.
That still I feel
Yes.
a little bit mine. So still I kept.
Right.
Otherwise, all, you see, the browsers are.
that brocades, yeah.
Well, even saints are human beings. Even saints are human beings. Yeah.
Then, as a Buddhist monk, you see, actually, it's one of our precepts, right?
Precepts,
No solid meal afternoon. So, I think about 40 years ago, after I came here, although the first day, I received the full ordination, monks,
Right.
highest monks of the ordination.
ordination.
I determined from that day, I want to practice that. Afternoon, no solid meal. But that very day, some sort of official ceremony lasted around 2 o'clock. So then I find a very good excuse. So I didn't practice that. And only after I came to India, then I decided the way, so I do the lunch, because of the broth on my table, and I smell. Then, yes, I'm monk. I must stop, eat. And then, lunch. Dinner, yes. Dinner. 칼치마지 거주 다디 마서는 아시아냐가는 야마레 근데 좀 된데 글라버디 냠내셔는 야고레스 디니무는 샤.
So the way His Holiness kind of decided to do this, follow the regular precepts, which is not to eat after lunch. On the first day that he wanted to do this was actually he had the dinner tray brought on his table, and he even smelled and experienced a mouth-watering sensation as well. And then he reminded himself, yes, I'm a follower of the Buddha in a monastic order, and it's one of my precepts. And so from today, I'm going to observe that. So the dinner tray was removed.
So when I listened to your sort of advice, I felt small way. I implement. Thank you. Wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
I wish this kind of sort of lecture, this kind of sort of explanation, I think should be more on all the churches on this sort of right. Of course, pray to God, also important.
Yes.
I usually, you see, in my sort of talk,
Right.
lecture on Buddhism,
Right.
to Buddhists, including Tibetan, they too much emphasis, too much because of
Focus.
focus on the fond, too much fond.
Fond.
Pray,
Yeah.
Buddha.
Yes.
That's not sufficient.
No. Another.
We must sort of implement
Yes.
day-to-day
Right,
life,
right.
and the teaching should be part of our daily life, not in a few minutes in the front of Buddha and some prayer, and then outside nothing. That's wrong.
Another Christian saint named Teresa of Avila, she said, if you're wondering, if you don't feel confident about your relationship with God, don't think about that. Forget that. Love your neighbor.
That's all.
And the relationship with God will take care of itself. So it's the same thing.
Absolutely.
Put your attention on the neighbor, not on God. But God isn't up there anyway. God is all around here, right?
Wonderful.
Well, thank you very much, Sally. It was quite a stimulating talk. And we now have about 30 minutes before we break for lunch. We won't be having a tea break. We'll go for the next 30 minutes and see whether others in the group have some questions. I have some questions myself even. And then this afternoon, I just want to remind you that when we come back, His Holiness the Dalai Lama will be offering us a talk.
왜?
Oh, Lade.
What to say? 아주 배배배 저다. 배배배 전구 덥살래. 내가 사면 여기 상황로 가서 그냥 시야 살래.
There's a Tibetan saying that I have actually dusted the remaining tsampa from the sack. So he said he has already done that the last 2 days.
So now nothing here. 이게 고수 이제 지난주 시야요.
So maybe someone said that he could start, then maybe other colleagues
That's
could
all.
join in.
And,
Yeah.
and Your Holiness, our plan, of course, is also for you to speak as long as you would like, and perhaps we can hear from some of the other gathered monastics. And then we'll have a conversation in the
Good.
afternoon. Will be our first opportunity for a little bit longer conversation, and any of the topics that we've raised this week so
Good.
far will be able to come up. And we'll do that again on Friday, on our last day. We'll have a kind of open conversation. But right now, if there are any questions, I see Dikila already has a thought, and any others of our group here. So Dikila, would you like to?
I just was very struck, Sally, by the statement that we see the world as like a baby in God's womb. And it is such a feminine way of describing the earth, and also it brings into question the nature of God in Christian theology. And I just wanted to hear about that. It's so different from what I understand of Christianity. I just wanted you to explain that a little bit.
Right. Well, one of the most important things, I think, about talking about God, no one has seen God. No one has seen God. We don't know how to talk about God. So we use...
This reminds me, one time, someone used to ask me, if you find opportunity meeting Jesus Christ, and what question will be? And I told, what is God? I want to know about God.
Right, yes. Yes, well, yes, yeah, exactly. Well, we don't know, do we? No. But we use images of our own experience to talk about God. So in Christianity, one of the big words that people have used is to say that God is Father. God is Father. And some people think that that's a description of God or a name. It's not a description or a name, because we've never seen God. It's an interpretation. It's a model. So we can change the way that we talk about God. And one of the ways that we have realized is, rather than taking just one set of images to see God as Father, Lord, King, and Master, this suggests that God is way off there, and we're way down here, and there's no connection. God is the King and the Master over us. But what if we understood the world as within God? within God's hands, or within like a baby in the womb. This would be a different understanding of God, and it would mean God is everywhere. We don't have to only meet God when we pray or after we die or something. God is present with us right here, now, in this room. God is in the atmosphere. And so it's not just for a feminine image, the baby in the womb. Everybody can use that language. The way everybody talks about or can talk about God as Father, for instance. One can also talk about God as Mother, who takes care of us. You have used this same language, that it's like taking care of the way a mother takes care of a baby. Yeah.
Yes, Diana.
Yeah. So Sally, I love your planetary house rules. And as you talked about them, I was trying to think, do they cover all of my planetary boundaries? You know, does this cover all of the trends that I was describing? And I think they do, but I have two questions about them. One is, take only your share. How would you apply that to how many children each person should have? Is our share 2 children or 1.8, or can we have as many as we want? And my second question is about keeping the house in good repair for future generations. Why do you just have good repair? Why don't we improve the house for future generations?
Let me start with the second one first. Indeed, we should improve the house. That would be wonderful. I guess I wasn't that much of an optimist. I thought we would be doing pretty well if we could keep the house in as good repair as we got it. But if we could improve it, that would be even wonderful. But human beings, as we have shown the last few days, haven't been too good in managing the planet. Most of the kind of things we've done have been bad. So we have to be careful that we don't think that we're going to control and manage the planet. On the first issue, I wasn't thinking about a family of taking your share. I was thinking of every life form, every individual, every one of the 8 billion of us, or however many there are, as well as other life forms that need nourishment. It isn't just taking your share as a human being. You have to take your share as one species, one life form among millions, billions. And this is not easy. That's why I say applying the rules, the planetary house rules, at an individual level is easier than applying it at a planetary level. But the concept should still be basically the same. That is, that we should have the same share. And one of the reasons why I wanted to focus on the 20% of human beings, the ones like us, the consumers, is because we are taking much too much of our share. No matter how you figure it out, it's way out of proportion. We need to cut way, way, way back. And when His Holiness said that one of the disciplines that when he had to give up eating in the afternoon, even the smallest thing that we do becomes a lesson in pulling back, in restraint. If we're able to say no to a dish of food, then maybe we can say no to a new car or a trip to Paris. That is, getting a whole different mindset of how we respond. Not, I have enough money and I can buy more and more and more and more, but I'm going to go into voluntary poverty. I'm going to go into my wild space, and I'm going to live differently. And there are lots of different ways to practice this. You don't have to do what Dorothy Day did, which is spend her life living in a smelly, noisy tenement with bad food, as she said. You don't have to do that. But she shows us a way to go in which we begin to cut down, to limit, to say no.
Jonathan?
This month, yes, it's on. I'm on the green mic.
Green mic, please. Yeah.
Yes, this month.
Green.
Okay, all right.
Okay, red one, please.
Okay. Yes.
Could you hand me that mic, please?
In the Jewish religion, this month we had our holiest day of the year, the Day of Atonement, when we ask for forgiveness. And I was traveling in Bhutan and was not able to fast that day, and I'm glad to have the opportunity for a cause to fast today. And for this day, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement in the Jewish religion, what we are told is that you can pray to God as much as you want, but it's useless until you apologize to the individual, to the person that you harmed or did wrong to or lied to. So it's very similar to what we've been talking about, that it's compassion from human to human that is the most important priority. And this leads me to a question for Sally, and that is, with this very important priority of human relationships and interaction, and less of a priority for this human-God interaction, or I should, instead of going up and down, I should go sideways. But what about the many, many people that believe in fate, that there's nothing humans can do, but it's all in God's hands. It's fate, which of course is paralyzing, and I think all of us around the room think that that's not a good idea. But what would be your approach to either shaking them up, or how do you deal with this issue of fate, those that believe in fate?
Thank you, Jonathan. That's a great question. And His Holiness also sort of pointed out that there can sometimes be a similar Buddhist sort of attitude, which is, oh, well, it's just karma. There's nothing we can do. It's just later. It's just karma. So how does one respond to that sense of almost sometimes a resignation? One's resigned. What's the response? It's a great question.
Well, I'll attempt one, difficult as it is. This is kind of a roundabout way of answering the question. Some people, until climate change actually, think about things like floods and droughts and so forth as natural disasters. They have nothing to do with us. This is fate. This is the natural world, or God's doing, or something outside of our control. But what we've realized increasingly is that a lot of things that we thought were fate or natural actually have our input into it. That is, some of the floods that are happening and the droughts are coming about because of climate change, not just because of natural factors. So there are things that happen. I mean, you walk under a ladder at the wrong moment, and you're hit in the head by a pail of water, and you can't do anything about it. But there's so much that we can change, and yet we don't. So I don't think fate should ever be used as an excuse for doing nothing. And it is sometimes used that way by religious people. And they say, oh, well, that's just God's will. I can't do anything about it. Some things we can't do anything about, but a lot of things we can.
One time, I think you were there. One time, I think here at Dharamsala, some Jewish, or say, rabbi, including one mysticism or something. One fur, one hat.
It's
Zama
Shakta. Shakta.
So there are, I think, different, because of that,
Traditions.
different sect or different tradition within Judaism. So the one told us the creation of world, say, of course, half God's blessing, half our own creature, our own. So the create of the world, something like through combination, God's blessing and our own sort of activities.
actions.
He mentioned this last one. Once that is told me that, so I was so surprised. He said, believe God. At the same time, we also have some kind of role. But faith, I don't know Sanskrit word. What was Sanskrit word?
Not
faith?
faith.
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 T-E-T-E.
Faith.
F-A-T-E.
You don't know. Ka.
Yeah, that's not
Yes, it's
Sanskrit.
here.
That's not Sanskrit.
Mandida.
Yeah.
저상가 대 응원되기 대바 다음에 대바 이식 대바가.
대바스기가 말해.
대부 말해.
Fate slabda ta
안다 페이스 소리.
mare F-A-T-E re ta lere serge.
안다 안다 그 소리.
The fate.
Fate.
Faith.
Not faith.
Mare.
Oh, fate.
Di leerang re
다
kake
leer
je
service,
togumen
다
dos
지-
dinde sama.
다직 당번에 차상 거에 샤베 소리지. 다 수수 타도 개매 봐. 얘네만 차시 때는 다직 거에 샤베 소리지.
네. Something absolute 그 소리.
Yeah.
Destination.
Like kind of fixed.
You cannot
Yes.
change.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would be the Buddhist? Because sometimes Buddhists can be like this, Your Holiness, where there can be a sense, oh, it's just my karma, I can't do anything.
No. The Buddhism as well as Jainism, and also I think many Hinduism,
Hindus, no.
they, I think more purer form. I think Jainism and Buddhism, no idea of creator, so everything law of causality, cause and effect. Among the cause, now action or karma. I think there are two among the causes. Some just biological.
It's just purely natural process.
As Shanta, there was a book clearly mentioned. He mentioned Penang Kasore, Penang Chuli Kandachumres, and Korkoreda, Mamangami Julichumres, Chulenshaw Kachumre, Korkorangami Juchumre, Namangami Julenshaw, Diag, Nuvel Kashavre, Korkorangami Juchevres.
For example, in Shantideva's text, he very specifically distinguishes between a causal process that's just purely natural, nothing to do with karma. So if we look at, the origin of this particular glass of water in front of our table, we can trace back to its causal process. And he doesn't bring in the notion of karma at all in this natural explanation.
That's sounds very similar Darwinian theory. Of cause and effect, just by nature. And many factors
involved.
climate, temperature, and many things. Ultimately, as scientists mentioned at the Big Bang, nothing. Before that, again, now we have to accept there are some causes of Big Bang. So these causes, because eventually, create immense sort of energy. So Big Bang take place. So then further question, what that come from? So all these nature process. Now then, Shandadeva stated, Tomi Didu Lali.
Then when it relates to the question of the origin of human suffering, sentient beings' experience of suffering and pleasure, happiness and pain and pleasure, then he brings in the concept of karma.
So the very now karma means action. So action entirely depends on actor, not created by God or Buddha or by nature, our own motivation.
Intention.
Intention and create certain action. Now that is karma. So therefore, certain result, certain fruit, result of certain action. Now the Buddhists, like Jainism and also many Hindus, believe the
consequences.
No. Continuation of mind. So on the basis of continuation of mind, the life after life. no beginning of that consciousness. So therefore, beginningless because of the life. Life after life, like that. So some action which was committed in previous life. So due to that action, some fruit of this sort of life, say, born in certain area, different color or different shape. And also because of the these are the gene shape to Bukashe, Mikashe, Gebe, Gin does mentality, just I think 2-3 days ago, I heard through BBC the oldest person or lady, 115-year-old, in Holland or something. Her sort of brain, the cell, is something sort of that. I mean, some people are now carrying some research. So say, gene, so
the suggestion seems to be there is something about the genetic disposition towards longevity, even from birth.
So again, now that among the causes, some conditions, there are, of course, they are parent to go like that. Then, another sort of cause, cause. Now action, the person who will concept with that kind of sort of material. Now karma involved. So now that kind of sort of result of karma, some we cannot change with new action. But otherwise, the many karma, for example, negative karma, negative action, already you've done, even within lifetime, early part of lifetime, you did something good, something bad, harmful actions. That imprints in our mind, continuation of mind. However, if you create another positive action, which is stronger than the previous negative action, then the effect of previous negative action disappear.
Neutralized.
Neutralized. Or sometimes because of that.
Destroyed.
So therefore, ultimately, because of that,
Fate.
so
This is the wrong one, maybe don't.
Self-creation.
So 중국은 조당사지. I remember that word. Now I forget. It's not coming. I think that's one sign of my brain now become older and older. Destination.
Destiny.
Yes.
Oh,
Destination.
Destiny.
So,
Destiny.
due to certain karma, you have certain destination. But again, you see, new karma come, that destination change. So therefore, we cannot say, oh, this is leh, this is leh.
It's not fixed.
That is the sign of laziness. We must make effort. Yes. Even though some bad karma's destination there, but we have to make work. Right? Change that. Can change. So that's fate, that fate.
And Your Holiness, in Sally's talk, there was an important role for sort of restraint and self-discipline. Does that also play a role in this context? I mean, one way of thinking about negative karma is that this is a negative, is a habit, that we can develop emotional habits that are negative. And one approach to that might be restraint and self-discipline to be able to resist those kinds of. Is that also a way in which we can change our destiny, so to speak?
Definitely, yeah.
All action, more effective action. Now action, little itching here, my hand immediately go there. That's no motivation. Automatic. Such action is neutral.
It's neutral, yeah. There's no moral kind of.
Now more serious action must be some motivation, based on motivation.
Involved. Motivation is involved.
So in order to change that motivation, of course, you have to know the consequences of certain action. We do not want suffering. So these sort of unfortunate things happen due to its own causes. So since we do not want suffering, we want happiness. So we must restrain because of doing, involve or commit any action which basic nature brings some unhappiness or pain or suffering on other. These action ultimately bring suffering on yourself.
Yes.
Any action brings some pleasant,
Benefit.
happiness
Benefit.
or benefit to other. These action positive because that brings
Ultimately.
happiness
Benefit
or
to oneself.
comfort or benefit to oneself. That's the law of causality.
Yes. Yes. Indeed.
So you see, thinking that way, restrain.
Resist.
Because selfish reason. Not talking about Buddha, not talking about God. Simply, things are due to law of causality. Things are changing due to its own causes and the conditions. So as far as pain experience is concerned, it's very much related. Among the cause, the karma, one's action there. So that's the motivation. So it depends on awareness.
So here, the one key factor is the awareness of the causal relations, how cause and conditions give rise to certain consequences and their dependent relations.
This is Buddhist talk. Not fit here.
Well, thank you very much, Your Holiness. I think actually now we have come to the end of our session. And I know that many of our people, including some of our speakers, are going to be exercising some restraint at lunch.
Oh, good.
In order to honor this.
Then those persons, you see, who are now sacrificing lunch, and we can spend a few more time here. And those people who, you see, eager for lunch, then leave. Then that also we can do, right?
You can, if you want, we can carry on a little bit more.
Or a little bit earlier.
Maybe we can get back a little earlier.
Yes, we could do that. Can we do
but we can take some light tea, light milk or tea. That's okay. I think it should be okay. Thank you, sir. Some practice of fasting.
Some form of fastings are so strict that you are not even allowed to swallow your own saliva.
So today, not that kind of strict.
Well, thank you very much, Your Holiness. So we'll break now, and I think we'll all plan to read. Yes.
꾸니신 조스케. 야 꾸니신 조스케. 되면 건서 nga줄 총 nga줄 퇴낭 베나마도.
I think I will come here at 12:30. 12:30.
Yes. Lovely.
Then about 2:30, I have to also leave, meet some doctor. One of the result of my previous karma, some pain here.
I see.
So the main causes is my own action, but because of
the conditions.
Some physical sort of because of that, the genes or these things. So doctor will check. So
very good.
2:30, I will leave.
Yes. We'll see you here at
12:30. I will come.
Yes, very good.
Then 1:30,
2:30.
2:30, then 2:30 I will leave.